CGTN, China Global Television Network.
We have learned an expensive lesson. Unless our environmental riches are protected by all, there can be no lasting prosperity for any of us.
Unless our environment is protected by all, there can be no lasting prosperity. That was the major message presented by global environmental leaders at the United Nations Environment Assembly hosted in Nairobi this week, the highest decision-making forum on issues concerning the natural environment. Now, while compiling a new declaration called Towards a Pollution-Free Planet, delegates called for rapid action from governments, businesses and individual consumers, and underlined that 9 million people are now killed by pollution each year, 1 in 6 global deaths. So what measures are in place to combat this, and what more can be done? And what were the other outcomes of the 3rd UN Environment Assembly? I'm Beatrice Marshall. Welcome to Talk Africa. Well, the theme of the 3rd UN Environment Assembly was pollution and striving to achieve the transition to a pollution-free planet. It is estimated that nearly a quarter of all deaths worldwide are caused by environmental conditions. At the Assembly, I chaired an informative Q&A session with government and business leaders examining the role of regulatory and legal frameworks and policies in addressing the issue of pollution and why these frameworks are of such vital importance. Let's take a look at some of the highlights from that discussion.
Kenya, we heard about you this morning, and we heard that you're a global leader in terms of fighting pollution through the plastic ban. And we heard from Kenya's president that the plastic ban, even though the legislation itself was a small issue, it has drastically reduced the amount of plastic in Kenya. Your main challenge, you say, is in the manufacturing sector there. So how exactly are you dealing with this? How are you going around all that to make this a success?
In the implementation of the ban, we are giving quite a few exemptions to the ban and also giving time for compliance, and therefore that is being taken very positively, and also allowing them to bring to us implementation plans for that action and actually jointly walking the path together, but at the same time working very hard to ensure that they can come on board and actually invest in alternatives, because at first they were in denial, so we had a bit of difficulty getting alternatives to fill the market. It was being filled by the informal sector, but by and large, other sectors now of the economy, like the growing of cotton, the growing of sisal, and other alternatives have come up. And all the products that are mostly replacing the plastics, the alternatives, are made from natural products. Therefore, we think we have spread the jobs to more Kenyans, and therefore the issue of job losses has been a problem, seems to be getting solved with time.
Right, that is one solution to that problem for Kenya. But of course, we want to hear global efforts to fight pollution. It is not only at the national level, but there are also some global efforts to fight this. And Dr. Laurent Fabius, President of the Constitutional Council, Republic of France, and the UN Environment Patron on Environmental Governance. We heard this morning from the Executive Director, UNEP, and he talked about the needs for global instruments that are needed to build a global alliance to fight pollution. One of that, if I may point that out, is the Global Pact. But first of all, if I may go back briefly and look at the population numbers that we are currently dealing with, 7.6 billion to 8.6 billion by 2030, and that could rise to 9.8 billion in 2050. Clearly, there is going to be a huge stress on the environment. What are the international efforts, though, that are in place to tackle pollution, and how important is a strong environmental governance in efforts towards achieving a pollution-free environment?
Before being the president of the French Constitutional Court, I was the president of the COP21 and of the Paris Agreement, and it is why I'm here. 2 minutes and 2 ideas. The first idea is that law is a powerful lever for a pollution-free planet. It seems obvious, but it has to be said. Pollution is a cross-cutting matter. It concerns all legal fields, from urban planning to tax law. Then it must be addressed at all levels. And in the fight against pollution, we have several important tools. We have science, we have engineering, we have economy, we have innovation, we have local initiatives, but law is one of these tools, and it is one of the most important. And I would add that legal norms are essential to define the society we want to live in. If we want nice speeches to become a reality, we need strong political decisions. But if we want political decisions to be effective, we need legal tools. Therefore, that's the first idea. The second idea relates to the Global Pact for the Environment initiative, and I'm happy to present it to UNEA. We know that many sectoral agreements exist in the environmental field, and they are very important. But we all know that we are in great need of an international comprehensive treaty on environmental protection. And this is precisely the aim of the Global Pact that we have launched with many others. And a first draft has been elaborated, but it's only a draft, and it has been elaborated by international network of leading legal experts that I was honored to chair. Last September, the French president officially launched the project during the UN General Assembly with Mr. Guterres, with Mr. Solheim, with many heads of your state and governments. And now we are in a diplomatic and political work phase aimed at building a coalition of states to endorse and define the project itself. And in this process, I think that UN Environment in Nairobi will play a very decisive role in the preservation of our planet and in the fight against pollution. Thank you.
Dr. Fabius, thank you. And I would like to get the same comment from the networks from the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. Ms. Patricia Espinosa, she's the Executive Secretary of the Secretariat to the UNFCCC. Well, thank you for joining us on this. And of course, since 1994, your organization has been involved in, through cooperation though, made efforts to combat climate change. In your view, how important is it to reflect environmental multilateral agreements into international law?
This is, as Mr. Fabius was just saying, this is absolutely necessary. Lawmaking is absolutely indispensable if we are to translate the agreements that we take, that we make, that parties are able to agree to at the global level into real action. Because agreements themselves provide, first of all, of course, a broad framework. They provide also a sense of direction of the actions that governments should be taking, because it is in their own interest. But then to implement them, that has to happen at the national level. And if we want, in the case of environmental agreements that are really about the transformation of societies, transformation of mindsets, transformations of how business operate, transformation of how people move around in the case of climate change and other environmental issues. There we need very clear frameworks in the laws, and the laws that provide also very clear institutional frameworks to enforce implementation. And that we also bear in mind that they have to be adjusted to the individual realities of the communities that are affected. We can learn from the lessons learned, experienced in other parts, but there is no one solution for every situation. It has to be fitted, it has to be custom-made.
We're going to take a short break now, but when we come back, we'll have more insights into the outcomes of the 3rd UN Environment Assembly. To stay with us.
This is CGTN.
You're watching CGTN. I'm Jeff Moody, live in Beijing.
You're watching CGTN.
Coming to you from Washington, D.C.
You're watching CGTN.
Coming to you from Nairobi.
I'm members of business
Mark, what can you tell us about events happening there?
This is a pretty picture. Timing of the event.
Second time back over to Beijing.
To go after them.
It's all about the dance.
Look at what we have.
This is CGTN. CGTN. See the difference.
The fact that 3 prizes this year went to China, to Mobag, to my old friend Wang Wenbiao, and to Saihan Ba is a credit to the enormous progress on environment policies. I mean, it's a huge enthusiasm in China for environment protection. Many private sector companies are also making new technologies which the world needs. So when we have made 3 prizes to China this year, it's to really acknowledge the turnaround of China into a much cleaner society, and with the slogan of President Xi, a more beautiful China. I'm very, very pleased that President Xi Jinping has made ecological civilization a main slogan for China. I think we should embrace this as a global slogan, because it doesn't only apply to China, it applies to the rest of the world, and we need these kind of inspiring slogans, because we need practical actions, but you need to be inspired by good policies.
That was the Executive Director of the United Nations Environment Programme, Eric Solheim, speaking at the Champion of the Earth Award ceremony at the UN Environment Assembly earlier this week. Welcome back to Talk Africa. Now, at the award ceremony, 6 environmental leaders received the United Nations' highest honor in their field, the Champions of the Earth Award. China's Saihanba afforestation community won the Inspiration and Action Award for transforming degraded land in the northern Inner Mongolia Autonomous Region into a forestry paradise. Wang Wenbiao, chairman of Elion Resources Group, won a Lifetime Achievement Award for leadership in China's green industry. China's Mobike, the world's largest smart bike-sharing company, won the Entrepreneurial Vision Award. President of Chile, Michelle Bachelet, Paul A. Newman, and his team at NASA's Goddard Space Flight Center, and American filmmaker Jeff Orlowski were also lauded for their positive impact on the environment. Now, China has long been stressing its strong commitment to sustainable development, and CGTN's Wang Yuan takes us through the finer details of these projects.
Located in northern China's Hebei province, the Saihanba forest farm used to be a royal retreat during the Qing dynasty. However, by the start of the 20th century, it had turned into a quite barren expanse. Decades ago, joining up with some forestry graduates, the local residents decided to do something about it. They started planting trees. Despite many challenges, 3 generations have been able to keep the project alive. And the Saihanba is now a vast forest covering nearly 75,000 hectares. It's the world's largest man-made forest. Concerning desertification, the Saihanba community is not alone. Wang Wenbiao was born in the Kubuqi Desert in northern China's Inner Mongolia Autonomous Region. Along with his colleagues, Mr. Wang began working on desertification control in 1988. They built roads through the desert and planted trees and various shrubs. In the same year, Wang Wenbiao founded the Underlined Resources Group. His company has helped afforest more than 6,000 square kilometers of deserted land. The pursuit of sustainable development is also emerging in many urban areas. For big cities troubled by traffic jams and air pollution, many are switching to bicycles. Huawei founded Mobike in 2014. By connecting a vast network of bikes to our phones, she created the world's largest bike-sharing company, operating in about 180 cities worldwide. Efforts to create a pollution-free planet will never end. Wang Yuan, CGTN.
Now, to offer further insights into the outcomes of the third UN Environment Assembly as well as the state of global environmental leadership, I have expert guests standing by in Beijing, Dr. Shen Yiyang, Senior Energy Consultant at the Asian Development Bank. In Johannesburg, Darrell Killian, Partner and Principal Environmental Scientist at SRK Consulting. And with me in Nairobi, Dr. Charles Lange, Deputy Director of the Environmental Planning and Research at the NEMA organization here in Nairobi. Welcome to the program, gentlemen. Dr. Shen, I'll start off with you in Beijing because the UN Environment Assembly this week recognized 3 Chinese people and projects from deforestation, afforestation, and a bicycle project from China there. Your thoughts first on what this means for the individuals who got those awards from the Environment Assembly, and secondly, what does this mean particularly for China?
I think this means China has been progressing well, I mean, for the environmental protection issue in the recent years. Actually, the local government, central government has been trying very hard, and the environmental awareness has been, I think, also improving among the normal people, I think.
What is China's, though, policy now on environment? What is China gearing up towards wanting to do when it comes to environmental protection?
Yes, I think the governmental policy and also regulation, legal parts is getting more and more strict for environmental issue. So not just the government release a lot of budget to promote the environmental project, but also the environmental regulation is becoming more and more strict. And a lot of factories just been shut down because of the environmental issue, air pollution, water pollution. This is very serious here. And also the market for environmental project is also growing. That means the capital from central government, local government, and also private sector are increasing here. So a lot of startup companies, environment-related companies, also get very good IPO. So I think the business environment for the environmental related project, program, company is getting better and better right now here.
All right. Darrell Killian, in Johannesburg, though, the focus of the UN Environment Assembly was towards a pollution-free planet. What is the progress that has been made so far? And give us some examples, particularly from South Africa.
Thank you for that question. Actually, there's been quite a lot of progress has been made in South Africa. South Africa, as you know, was host to the World Summit on Sustainable Development back in 2002. And since then, there have been a number of policies and regulations and programs put in place in order to give effect to the then Johannesburg Plan of Implementation. So certainly one of the key focus areas for government is on managing pollution, preventing first and foremost, mitigating it where it can, and then managing it. And the focus, obviously, for the government has been trying to ensure that the resources, water, sea, land, and air, are of a sort of a standard that do not effectively damage the people's health.
Right, Dr. Lange, of course, we know from Kenya's perspective that the plastic ban has been one of the biggest issues to come out of Kenya this year. But in terms of other pollutions, what is Kenya doing?
Thank you very much, Beatrice. I think Kenya, we have taken major strides in trying to manage pollution in this country. First, I want to start with the Environmental Management and Coordination Act, which gives the broad framework for how we're going to manage our environment. And pollution is one of the key provisions of this act. Within this framework, legal framework, we have the provision for regulations, and we started first of all with the Water Regulation Water Quality Regulations of 006, which provides framework for how we're going to manage water pollution, among others. We have waste management regulations for 2006, which also provides a framework on how we're going to manage our solid waste management. There is also waste management strategy that we've developed that also seems to implement the regulations.
Right. So obviously these countries are not short on policy, but in terms of enforcement itself, what are you doing?
Thank you, Beatrice. Again, I think in terms of enforcement, for compliance, I think we have the institution responsible for that, and we have built the capacity of this institution so it will be able to enforce compliance to the provision of the standards of these regulations. So we have teams who are on a regular basis monitoring and providing decision making on how we should move forward in terms of enforcement of compliance.
Right. Daryl, we're talking about a pollution-free environment though, but when you look at the statistics, we're still saying an estimated quarter of all deaths worldwide are caused by environmental conditions, 12.7 million tons of plastic waste entering into the oceans. Is a pollution-free environment really feasible?
You know, I think with everything there, you need to aspire to a sort of an ideal, look ahead and get people that buy into that ideal. Certainly, I think that it might be for some quite ambitious, but I think it's a starting point. And just having people come together at the assembly to discuss these issues, obviously scientists indicating the issues that you mentioned now, the major problems that we face in pollution, but also bringing forward and showcasing those people and institutions that are doing some amazing things. So the idea is to actually try and give people something to work towards. But of course it's going to take time and it's going to take a collective effort.
Right, Dr. Lange, I do want to put that to you though. Do you see a pollution-free environment actually becoming feasible?
Thank you, Beatrice. Again, I think the most important thing is that through science we have standards that have been developed to ensure, to provide framework on how we can manage pollution so that we can minimize the impacts that are associated with pollution. We have the WHO guidelines, we have the national standards in Kenya, and so the most important thing for us will be able to try and ensure that we maintain the standards. It might not be very possible really to have a free, but the most important thing here for us is to be able to maintain, to keep within the standards, such a way that the impacts that are associated with the pollution can be managed and pollution can be controlled sustainably.
Right. Dr. Shiani, in Beijing, I do want to hear that from you as well, because China has been successful in cutting the use of coal, their coal consumption. Do you see a pollution-free environment actually becoming feasible?
I think the coal-fired power generation is a major source of air pollution here in China, and I think in the recent few months, I can see a lot of factories being shut down already. So I think in the long run, there is a possibility this problem can be somehow solved, but need a very kind of continued efforts from both government and private sector, I think.
Right. Dr. Shen, I do want to stay with you, though, because I want to find out China's leadership position when it comes to environmental issues, particularly with the U.S. now, pulling out of the Paris Agreement. How does China view this matter? Is China hoping to become a global leader now in environmental matters?
The Chinese President, Mr. Xi Jinping, announced that by 2030, China's energy consumption and the carbon emission will reach peak. I think that's a kind of promise. And from the situation here in China, we can see that this target is gradually being met. And a lot of effort, budget, and also the management regulations are also focusing on this target. So I think China is kind of more serious on climate change and even more serious on environmental protection, I think.
Right. Daryl, I do want to put that to you because countries are calling now for stronger global commitment to fight pollution. Where is that leadership going to come from, or where are we seeing that leadership coming from?
That's an interesting question. I think as your previous panelists just mentioned, I think that obviously China is going to be playing a big role. It's a very large economy, and it certainly is also a big player in Africa. But I believe that African countries, certainly if you look at their policies and the emergence of policies aimed at protecting resources, are going to be playing more and more of a key role. I mean, as South Africa has been playing that in the various UN forums. I think also, obviously, the Western European countries and European bloc will continue to play a key role in these major forums.
Right, Dr. Lange, your thoughts on that?
Thank you very much. I think one of the key things is that the global community has a responsibility to try and find strategies on how to deal with this. At national levels, countries have the responsibility to try and find a solution in trying to meet these targets as a from a national perspective. Thank you.
Right, Darrell Killian, I want to get your final thoughts here as we close the program now, because the world has committed to a pollution-free planet, and so moving forward, and with the declarations made by the ministers that they just concluded UN Environment Assembly, what do you see happening?
I think it's going to take some time to play out. I mean, obviously, it is a very, very important gesture. It's really great that all the ministers have actually sort of issued this declaration and committing really their countries and, by and large, a large part of the world to addressing this major issue and risk to sustainable development. But I do think it'll take some time. It'll have to go back to countries. It'll have to be affected through legislation. If the legislation doesn't exist, you'll have to establish that legislation to give effect to it. And if it does, maybe there might be a lot of legislation reform in order to sort of strengthen the regulatory frameworks in the various countries. But I think that it's going to, at least it raises awareness, and it puts the issue around pollution squarely on the international agenda, and therefore on the agenda of the various countries around the world.
Right, Dr. Lange, of course, Kenya is already a global leader in terms of the plastic ban. What do you see, though, happening following that ministerial declaration?
I think the thing that we're likely to see is that we're likely to see many of the countries trying to see how they can best mainstream some of the resolutions into their own government policies and action plans. And so I think, for instance, if we talk about the plastic ban, I think that we could see there were so many countries interested to see how Kenya was able to do this. And so there was maybe calling to see what are the lessons that they needed to learn from us, and what is it they can do, follow what we did and do, so that at least they can also contribute towards a free planet. Thank you.
Right. Yes. Dr. Shen, you do have the final moment in this. Give us your Chinese perspective.
China now actually is under a serious environmental pollution situation, and this is because in the past several decades, very rush development caused all this issue, and now it's need a lot of more effort and money to recover them. So I hope the other developing countries can learn the lessons from China and also protect the environment during the development stage. And in Chinese case, I think I can see that a lot of improvement here, but still a long way to go.
Right, Dr. Shen, we'll leave it there for the moment, and that's all we have time for this week. But thank you to my guests for their insights in Beijing. Dr. Shen Yi Yang, Senior Energy Consultant at the Asian Development Bank. In Johannesburg, Darrell Killian, Partner and Principal Environmental Scientist at SRK Consulting. And with me in Nairobi, Dr. Charles Lange, Deputy Director for Environmental Planning and Research at the Kenya National Environmental Agency. Thank you very much for joining us here on the program. Remember, you can join the conversation online through Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. And do join us again next week for more Talk Africa. From me, Beatrice Marshall. Goodbye.